Hello, BookTube. I went back to the Brattle Bookshop. I once again had an unsavory appointment early in the day, and so once again I sweetened the pot by promising myself a trip to the Brattle. And it was sweetened even more by the fact that one of you has given me a very generous store credit. You people, I swear, you give me store credit at the Brattle. I can't thank you enough. It is so pleasant to do. I mean, the Brattle's not expensive anyway, but nevertheless. I should, for those of you who are new to the channel, the Brattle's a used bookstore in the heart of Boston. And the reason it's not expensive generally is because in addition to the 3/4 of the bookstore itself, there's also a lot outside, a gigantic lot full of thousands of bargain books. $1, $3, and $5 bargain books with no organization whatsoever except by price point and no guarantee of any kind of shape, although the Brattle doesn't put junk out there. I mean, hundreds of people look over these things every week, and sometimes you can't get all the carts in time if a sudden rainstorm starts up. So the books won't always be in perfect condition, although plenty of them will be. Plenty of them will be. And that's why the Brattle is not all that expensive, because you can go there with $20 and come out with 20 books from the Brattle sale carts if you want. There's all sorts of good stuff out there. It's not just, the 4th out of 10 in a series of electrical repair manuals from 1970 or stuff that you would see outside in the outside barrows of other used bookstores. Instead, it's really good stuff. A lot of times, it's well worth a long leisurely prowl, and it wasn't all that freezing cold today, so I was able to do that. I was out down there anyway, so I got a bunch of books, and I want to show them to you. That's what this channel is for. So the first one is an Oxford World Classics Trollope. I had all of these things when they were in mass market paperbacks. Oxford World Classics did all of Trollope's fiction to celebrate his centennial, and I had all of those mass market paperbacks at one time or another. And then I've started to fall out of love with mass market paperbacks, so I thought, well, I'll just get rid of all of these, and I'll get trade paperbacks down the line of whatever Trollope that I want. That was a big mistake. I should not have done that. Not only because that was done for the centennial, and Oxford, of course, is not going to reprint all of those mass markets in trade paperbacks anymore. They're just going to do the mainstream novels. They're not going to do all of the smaller stuff. But also because the editorial editions changed in a lot of cases. So you would get the Prime Minister, and it would have a different introduction and different notes, sometimes much better notes, in the mass market edition than in the trade paperback that eventually came out down the line. So I shouldn't have got rid of those mass markets. So when I'm out and about and I see a Trollope mass market, and I don't have it, I tend to grab it. But I prefer the trade paperbacks. Trade paperbacks for me are they're easier to shelve, they're easier to pay attention to, they're easier to read. And today I found a Trollope novel in the exact same edition. I actually kept the mass market paperback of The American Senator. I kept my mass market paperback of this. But I saw the trade paperback at the Brattle, and I realized that it's the same editorial edition. They just reprinted it. They didn't update it at all. So I grabbed it. This is a terrific, lesser-known Trollope standalone novel. And it sort of feeds into an idea that we have battered back and forth, of course. A lot of you expressed to me that you really enjoyed our Trollope read-alongs. We did all of the Palliser novels in 2019. And I was thinking that 2020 we ought to do a lot of standalone Trollope novels. This would be one of them, if we did. I think that might be... They're all on Project Gutenberg, so they won't cost you. You don't have to go to your version of the Brattle Bookshop and hunt around for this. But I'm thinking that I might do that. I would never do it in January. I'm still getting my bearings underneath me. But I'm thinking we might do that in 2020. We might do a whole bunch of standalone Trollope novels. They're lots of fun, and this one has, you can see the fox hunting scene on the cover. This one has an epic fox hunting scene. I haven't read this since I got that mass market paperback. That was 15 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that. So I found that, and then the next thing is a perfect example of BookTube synchronicity, BookTube serendipity. Alan Moreton on his channel has created a great BookTube challenge, a reading challenge for 2020, Chunksters for Charity, where you assign a donation amount to every chunkster, everything over 800 pages that you read, and donate it to Book 8 International. And he has, I'll leave a link to his video if I remember to do it. He has pinned his video of introducing this whole series and describing the details of it on his own channel. And I did a video about it myself. I think we should all do it. And what in his introduction video, Alan mentions some of the books that he has on his TBR to read throughout 2020 in his own Chunksters for Charity TBR. And he's been going back and forth about it. He mentioned The Wheel of Fortune by Susan Howich, and I mentioned in my own video announcing the series, I just happened to mention that it's a very, very awful book. And now he's talking about replacing it. But as I mentioned in my video, huge books that are 800 pages or over 1,000 pages. Wheel of Fortune is enormously long, 1,200 pages long. They create their own field of gravity. They create their own rules of physics. So it, in a way, doesn't even matter if the book is bad. So I wasn't at all meaning to dissuade him from reading. The same thing with his choice of Thackeray novel. He picked The Newcomes. And I showed you Pendennis, which is another huge... They're both huge Thackeray novels. And I mentioned just offhandedly that Newcomes seemed like a grind to me. It seemed mostly about the degradation of having no money, of being poor. Just over and over again. I mean, you get poor characters in Trollope as well, threadbare, down-at-heel characters, but you also get all sorts of other characters. And it isn't just about how the poor characters don't have any money. But that was as much a call for me to reread the Newcomes and see all the stuff I missed as it was a call for Alan to change his mind. Now he's talking about dumping that for Pendennis. But another one of the things on his list of books that he was thinking of reading was the third and fourth novels of the Raj Quartet by Paul Scott. Now, I myself think that the Raj Quartet is underrated as a work of literature. I think that it's amazingly good, amazingly powerful. It disturbs me that it is often written off as just an elaborate adventure story along the lines of The Far Pavilions by MMK. Which I think is a fantastic book on its own and would make a great book to read for Chunksters for Charity. The Far Pavilions is at least 1,000 pages long, and it's terrific. But what Paul Scott was doing in the Raj Quartet is much, much more ambitious, I think, than just an adventure story. And so I smiled when I saw that he had lumped the third and fourth book in the quartet together to make a chunkster that's over 800 pages long. And when I saw that video, I was thinking, well, I showed in my own video a bunch of the chunksters that are coming to me just as in the normal course of events in the publishing world. There'll be chunksters. And so I showed in my video a bunch of the chunksters that I'm going to be reading anyway in the course of 2020. I'm glad to link it with a worthy charity. But then I was thinking, well, but what other chunksters can I read, to fill out the year? Like, for instance, Pendennis. And when I saw Alan's video, I thought, one chunkster I'd very much like to read in 2020 would be the whole of the Raj Quartet. Not just volumes 3 and 4, but the whole thing. I haven't read the whole of the Raj Quartet since I had it in a mass market box set of paperbacks eons ago. And I knew exactly what I wanted. And when you're picky like this, you should never be picky with the Brattle Bookshop. You shouldn't go there being picky, because you won't find anything you want if you do. You have to give yourself over to the karma of the sale cards. If you do that, you'll find gems aplenty. But if you go into the sale lot thinking, well, I only have 15 minutes, I'm looking for one particular edition of Star Trek, you won't find anything. But in the back of my mind, I knew what version I want. I don't want those mass market box set anymore. That would be just murder on my eyes. And I don't want the big trade paperbacks. There's a trade paperback quartet that Alan showed the cover artwork for. I didn't want those either because I remember those being poorly made. But I also remembered a big one-volume Raj Quartet in bright red that came out years and years and years ago in a hardcover and in a trade paperback. And I thought, that's the version I want. And in the back of my mind, I thought, the Brattle will provide. Sooner or later, the Brattle will provide. They're out buying books all the time. All kinds of books. They don't turn their nose up at anything. So I have often said, my sort of motto is the Brattle will provide. If you don't push it, if you just wait, what you want will eventually show up there. Sure enough, here it is. This is the exact version I was talking about. This is the whole of the Raj Quartet. This is the hardcover, but that's okay. It's This is Morrow, but I think this is a UK imprint of Morrow. I don't think this is the US version. Oh no, it's got a US $25 price tag. Well, anyway, this is the version that I wanted. I'll take the hardcover. The trade paperback probably wouldn't hold up very well. The only problem that I have with it is the illustration on the cover. I don't mind. It's from the famous series, the famous miniseries, which is really, really good. But that's a boring picture. You got somebody's the shadow of a head there. The backgrounds are all modeled with shadow. It's a very important relationship. The relationship that we're seeing here on the cover is the most important relationship in the book, one of them. So I understand why someone would put it there as opposed to using, for instance, a publicity still, which were made. Publicity stills in fine detail were made and would have looked much better. I don't so much mind there being a picture from the show on the back, but I don't really want that to be the front cover. And fortunately, I have a way around that. I will find, in some picture book, I will find a picture that I want to go there instead. I'm never going to get rid of this volume. I don't care about its resale value. I'm going to reinforce the dust jacket anyway. So the thing that I will want to do is find a picture that can go underneath this gold rim there. I will find a picture that can go underneath that. I will attach it here with a few daubs of tape, and then I will reinforce the whole cover so that that is my cover. That's a pleasant project on its own. I'm pretty sure I know what I will use for that. And then I will have the Roush Quartet. So this is going on the pile for the Chunksters for Charity Challenge, absolutely, because the Brattle will provide. And the same is true for this next book. Just yesterday, when I was making a capitalism video about books that I'm buying in bookstores, I mentioned that I bought the next 2 editions of the Expanse series. And that when I was there, I actually had in my hand Brandon Sanderson's War of Kings and George R.R. Martin's Dance of Dragons. And in both cases, War of Kings and Dance with Dragons, I put them back because I thought, no, you see those used. You don't see them all the time used, but you see them used. There's no reason to pay $20 for this thing when you can pay $5, $3, nothing for it, used. You just have to wait. That's all. Unlike The Expanse, which I'm going to reread in a shot because I'm in love with the new series, there's no hurry in either of these. And it turns out the Brattle will provide. There is the Dance with Dragons. This is perfectly new trade paperback, and this is exactly the version that I had in my hand yesterday. What is the price on this thing? $18. And this was free. So there's no comparison. It's kind of, I don't like this big banner here, but it's kind of a sedate cover. I like it just fine. And I've read this already, and I really liked it. I read it specifically doing a kind of mental exercise to see whether or not it would work as a standalone volume. And I liked the job that was done. It doesn't work as a standalone volume, but I still really enjoyed it. So, perfect example. I'm sure that the Brandon Sanderson will show up at the Brattle or some charity bookstore. I'm sure that it will. Either in hardcover or in trade paperback. Sooner or later, it will show up. The War of Kings is the first volume in the Stormlight Archive series. And the next volume in the Stormlight Archive series is due in 2020. Sometime in 2020. And I'll almost certainly be getting it. And there'll be a chance there to ask the publicist if maybe there's a copy of the first book lying around. That's also possible as well. In other words, there's just no reason at all that I should have bought that new trade paperback at Barnes & Noble. So I'm glad that I didn't. Then this next one, it was next two. The Brattle, the outside sale carts are a bonanza. If you haven't got that impression already, even from this video, you can watch the million other videos I've done on the Brattle Bookshop there. You never know what's going to be out there. It changes all the time. The inside of the store changes all the time as well. And you never know what's going to be out there, not just in terms of variety, but also in terms of age. The Brattle sale carts outside are a perfect demonstration of the fact that not everything that's old is valuable. And the people that work at the Brattle have been trained to estimate the value of a book by one of the best people who can do that anywhere in the world. The proprietor, the owner of the Brattle Bookshop, can tell in a fraction of a second whether or not a book has any resale value at all, whether or not it's any kind of thing to put a $20 price tag on and put on the third floor with the antiques and collectibles. And if it's not, then old stuff will often go right out onto the sale carts. So I have found this little Hyde Cottage is absolutely full of old books, 100-year-old books. You've seen a lot of them in my library tour. I paid no more than $1 for any of them. It's a sad thing to say about a grand old book. You want to think that they would all be valuable, but they're obviously not. And I found an old book. Out in the Brattle. This is Charles Francis Adams. This is an autobiography, the autobiography of Charles Francis Adams. And this printing is from 1916, I think. That is Charles Francis Adams, of the famous Adams family of New England. And this is the autobiography. And also, when Adams died, the Massachusetts Historical Society had a memorial for him. A reserved, very New England, very Yankee, very granite-lipped memorial for him. And Henry Cabot Lodge made an address, a long and beautiful address. And this volume, in addition to having the autobiography, has that long address by Lodge. So that is fantastic. And I wanted to read you, before the memorial address, there is a brief note to the reader from the Historical Society. Because the Historical Society, when his life was almost over, Charles Francis Adams sent a sealed package to the Historical Society in 1913, and it contained his autobiography. It contained an autobiographical sketch, as he deprecatingly put it. He deprecatingly said that it was just an idea. It was a few notes. It wasn't anything finished. Now, of course, that was an Edwardian turn of phrase. It very much was a finished work. It very much had been a labor of love. And there's a neat note at the beginning here. The Historical Society brings up whether or not they'd been canvassing around to find out if anybody would be willing to write a memoir of Charles Francis Adams, or anybody willing to do any kind of work like that. And they couldn't find anyone who was exactly suitable. And then they mentioned that of the contemporaries of Mr. Adams, no one remained qualified by knowledge or sympathy to prepare a memoir. And the autobiographical sketch, on examination, made a search for the biographer unnecessary. It is full and characteristic of the writer. You notice the mention of no sympathy and the mention of full and characteristic of the writer. Give you a hint, the only hints that anybody in this volume is ever going to give you, that maybe Charles Francis Adams wasn't all that nice a person. But he was, this is a fantastic book. It's a shame that it's not better known. It's a fantastic autobiography, and if it were reprinted, it should always be reprinted with the Cabot Lodge address, which works as an introduction better than anything that anybody else could do. And Adams was also really valuable. He was really valuable in his diplomatic services during the American Civil War in England, in ways that have been largely unsung, and that whose long-term importance everybody at the time knew. So that there were people, when the American Statesman series started, a series of potted biographies, a little while after Charles Francis Adams popped off the twig. When that series started, a lot of the people who started that series, including the guy who started it, who was from Boston, considered him to be on a par with the greatest people in American history because of the service that he'd done the country. He's totally forgotten now. But his autobiography is a hoot. It is a hoot. It is the autobiography, the life story of someone who is trying hard not to divulge anything. And that tension is always fun. It can be maddening because we're accustomed in the present age to memoirs that tell literally everything. And I took a bowel movement this morning. Let me describe it for you in my chapter 1. and so when you get to 19th century or 19th century holdover novels like this, or autobiographies like this thing, or like A Backward Glance by Edith Wharton, books where they say that they're an autobiography, so the 20th century attitude is that will mean divulging things, and they're not meant for that at all. This is it's going to be a delight to reread this, just a delight. I haven't read this in years and years and years. The last copy that I read was at the Boston Athenaeum here in Boston. It wasn't a copy of mine. I don't think I've ever owned this. So it's going to be great fun to read not only the book but also the memorial address, and in a conflagration that would only happen at the Brattle, I found that. And the reason why this happened, the reason why this often does happen, the reason, in fact, that is at the basis of The Brattle Will Provide, is that when the Brattle gets books, they tend to get a collection, a big bunch of books from the same person. I box everything up really quickly to get them there, get them out of the kitchen as fast as possible, to get them into the truck, down into the basement, and then they're brought up piecemeal to be sorted and priced and disseminated either into lots or into the store. And because of that process, books that were bought together will often be broken up. But nevertheless, if you see one thing, you are likely to see something else, something connected to it in some way or other. And sure enough, this is a biography of Charles Francis Adams by his son, Charles Francis Adams Jr. So this is a biography of this guy. Heavily reliant on the autobiography, but also reliant on lots of other sources too. And the introduction calls this book, the autobiography, quote, bitterly entertaining. Which I couldn't have put it better myself. This is a reprint of the old American Statesman series, which some of you who are maybe in America who go to a lot of antiquarian bookstores might remember what they looked like. They were uniform, small blue hardcovers. Some of them make much better reading than others, obviously. Some of them are much better informed than others. But there are a whole bunch of famous names that took part in them. And this was one of them. And this is a trade paperback of that. I haven't seen an American Statesman hardcover in a long time in a used bookstore. But that's all right, because this is just fine. And, oh my God, the sheer Brattle pleasure of having the two of these together. These together, I'm probably going to spend 5 or 6 hours on these two things together. And it's a pure benefit that I got them both at the Brattle, because if I just got this thing at the Brattle, I would have grabbed it and I would have read it. But the whole time I was reading it, I would have been thinking, geez, I'd really like to reread the autobiography. And same thing, if I'd found this instead, I'd be thinking, his son wrote a whiny biography of him. I'd really like to read that too. And now I have them both, so I don't have to worry. I'll read them back to back. And they will go in my Adams section of my library, of my biography section, once I finally get around to organizing my biography section. All the Adams stuff will go together. And then this next one is an example of, I just mentioned that the Brattle Will Provide, because if you see volume something or other of something, you know that you're going to see the rest of it. Now, you might not see it. It might be that the person who sold it only had the one volume in a long series. And it also might be that the other volumes in the series come up from the basement, are priced, and are put on display when you don't know about it, and somebody else gets them instead. So you might not ever see it, but nevertheless, hope springs eternal. And when I see a book in a series at the Brattle, I always hope that I'm soon going to see the other books in the series, and I'm really hoping that with this next one. This next one's in a little rough shape. I'm going to have to repair a lot of these things, but that's okay. I love doing that with Brattle books. And this is something we've seen on this channel before in trade paperback. This is James Morris, and this is his Pax Britannica series, and this is the third one, Farewell the Trumpets, an Imperial Retreat. But it's a hardcover. It has this, that is the same illustration, cover illustration. This is on the trade paperbacks that I showed you. I have all three of these in trade paperback. And this is a fantastic, fantastic trilogy. The last thing that James Morris wrote before James Morris became Jan Morris. And this is all about, as you can see on the cover, this is all about the transition from the height of Victorian imperial power to World War II, the Suez Crisis, and the end of the empire. These books are fantastic. I reread them all the time, either in part or in whole. And I got all three of the trade paperbacks that have these dual panel covers, and at the Brattle. I got all three of them at the Brattle, and I was happy to get them. And the one reservation that I had, in fact, I might have mentioned it when I hauled them on this channel, is that the trade paperbacks aren't particularly well put together. So it's a great blast of nostalgia to read. I read them first in those trade paperback editions, and it's great to have the uniform set of them. But you have to be delicate with them, because those trade paperbacks aren't well made, and the glue is dried out, so you can tend to destroy them. And that is not going to be true of hardcovers. And I did not know that the hardcovers were made to look exactly like the trade paperbacks. I should have, obviously, because the trade paperbacks were reprints of these things, but I never put two and two together. So I didn't know that these existed as hardcovers with dust jackets. And I found volume 3 today at the Brattle, so I'm really hoping that sooner or later, by serendipity, I find the middle volume, Pax Britannica, and the first volume, at Heaven's Command. I'm hoping that I find the other two to match this one and just be a trilogy this way. It's not the end of the world if I don't. I'll just keep this. But nevertheless, I hope that I do, because this is a terrific, terrific series. And then the last one, the last book that I want to show you, is just a miscellaneous Brattle romp. This is a collection of columns by Brooks Atkinson. This is Tuesdays and Fridays, when he became a roving reviewer, a roving critic, a roving editor at large for the New York Times, and his column appeared on Tuesdays and Fridays. That's what the title means. But that was in semi-retirement from the literary world. He had led an enormously productive literary life before he started writing these columns. Was the drama critic at the Times for 25 years, maybe even more than that. He was the weekend book section editor for a long time. And before that, he worked at the dear old Evening Transcript here in Boston. And the whole time that he was doing all of that, he was churning out book reviews and then theater reviews and doing them in an amazing voice, a voice that you could take his name off it and you would know immediately that you're reading something by him. That's true of these columns as well. I did not know that these had been collected. This is going to be an absolute delight to go through again, because I'm a fan of this author. And what I really wish, I'll never see it, but what I really wish is that I'd found an 800 or 900 page collection of all of his book reviews. I don't think such a book exists. I don't think he ever thought it was worthwhile to do, or ever got around to doing it. That is our author. And I want to read you, by way of wrapping this up, I want to read you the first paragraph of the foreword. The foreword is by S.N. Behrman, and the first paragraph talks about Atkinson as a drama critic. But it captures well what he was like just as a critic in general, whether he was writing about drama or TV or books. When Brooks Atkinson gave up his job as drama critic on the New York Times after serving in that capacity for 35 years, it caused as much of a flurry in the theater belt as did the analogous abdications of Queen Christina and Edward VIII in their other circles. Even among those who had been pinked on occasion by his unbuttoned foil, there was a sense of loss. Mr. Atkinson has a neat stroke for the jugular vein of pretension, and there were sufferers, but they submerged their private grievances in the general lamentation. It was felt somehow that his departure had diminished the stature of the theater as a viable institution. If you were panned, at least you were panned by Atkinson. That was also true of his book reviews, which are amazingly good. And I'm going to have to check and see. I'll have to look around and see online and see if maybe some of his book reviews were collected. But I know that nothing like the comprehensive volume that I want for everybody. I always want everybody who does it at all to collect all of their book reviews. And I always call for that. I know that the gigantic comprehensive book of his never happened. And I don't think he ever wrote a memoir about his time at the old Transcript. The Evening Transcript was a ramshackle hodgepodge of brilliant people. Its story has never been told, and it should be. And it breaks my heart, because with every decade that passes, it becomes less possible to tell that story, as the information, as the documentation fragments to the wind. Nevertheless, I know that for years he would say, I mean to do that. I mean to write just about Boston. But I don't think he ever did, and I don't think his book reviews were ever collected in any comprehensive way. But this will still have a lot to do with books he was always reading. It'll have a lot to do with books, and that's fine by me. That'll be enough. This will be enough, unless the Brattle will provide. Unless whoever had this book had as much of Brooks Atkinson as was ever made into books. Maybe more of these will appear. I hope I see them if they do. But anyway, that is yet another totally unnecessary Brattle trip. To continue with this day is just me waffling endlessly about books. Sorry about that. I'll wrap this up for now, but who knows? I might be back. Thank you, BookTube.